The public image of Joel Osteen has long been built around calm reassurance, steady optimism, and a message that life can improve regardless of present struggles. Every week, millions of people watch or attend his sermons expecting encouragement rather than confrontation. His speaking style is soft, controlled, and emotionally steady, which has made him one of the most recognizable religious voices of modern media-driven Christianity. Over the years, his message has centered on confidence, gratitude, and forward momentum. For many believers, this approach feels accessible and comforting, especially in uncertain global times marked by financial stress, health fears, and social instability. However, public figures who build careers on emotional reassurance often face unique challenges when personal struggles surface. The expectation of constant strength can create a silent pressure that outsiders rarely see. Religious leaders are often viewed as symbols rather than individuals, and that difference can create emotional isolation. When private pain enters public life, it forces audiences to reconcile two realities: the inspirational figure they admire and the human being who experiences doubt, grief, and uncertainty. This tension creates a powerful narrative moment, one that audiences naturally find compelling and emotionally authentic. The global reach of Lakewood Church transformed a local ministry into an international religious brand. Services reach viewers across continents through television broadcasts, streaming platforms, and social media clips that are designed to be easily shareable. This scale has turned weekly sermons into carefully structured communication events. Messages are crafted not only for spiritual meaning, but also for emotional clarity and mass accessibility. This type of ministry requires strategic planning similar to major media productions. Lighting, staging, camera angles, and message timing all contribute to audience engagement. For followers, this polished delivery reinforces trust and stability. For critics, it sometimes raises questions about commercialization and branding in modern faith spaces. Regardless of perspective, the scale of the operation reflects a shift in how religious influence functions in the digital age. Churches with strong media presence now shape cultural conversations far beyond physical congregations. The success of large ministries demonstrates how storytelling, emotional messaging, and consistent tone can build global communities. Yet with that reach comes scrutiny. The larger the platform, the more audiences expect transparency, accountability, and emotional authenticity from leadership figures who represent hope to millions worldwide. The leadership journey of Joel Osteen began unexpectedly after the passing of John Osteen, who had built the foundation of the ministry. Unlike traditional pastoral successions, this transition happened quickly and without years of public preparation. Joel had primarily worked behind the scenes in media production and broadcast operations. He was not originally known for public speaking or stage leadership. When leadership responsibility arrived suddenly, it created internal pressure to maintain stability for the congregation while personally processing grief and uncertainty. Many leadership experts describe this type of transition as emotionally complex because it combines loss with immediate performance expectations. From the outside, the ministry appeared stable and even expanding. Internally, the adjustment likely required rapid emotional growth, communication skill development, and confidence building under public observation. Sudden leadership changes often force individuals to develop resilience quickly. For religious leaders, this challenge becomes even more intense because followers often seek spiritual certainty during leadership transitions. The expectation to provide emotional stability while personally navigating grief can create a lasting psychological burden that continues long after the public transition appears complete. Over time, Joel developed a communication style focused on emotional accessibility rather than theological confrontation. His sermons rarely emphasize punishment, judgment, or fear-based motivation. Instead, they focus on personal growth, mindset, and hope-driven faith. Supporters argue this reflects compassion and modern emotional awareness. Critics argue it simplifies complex spiritual realities. This debate reflects a broader shift within global religious communication, where audiences increasingly respond to supportive messaging over authoritative correction. In media environments, positivity-driven messages often travel further and faster. Encouraging messages are more likely to be shared, replayed, and quoted. This reality influences how large ministries structure public communication. However, when leaders become strongly associated with optimism, audiences may unconsciously expect them to remain emotionally unshaken. This creates a narrative risk. If personal struggle becomes visible, it can challenge audience assumptions about strength and certainty. Public figures in motivational or spiritual roles often face this paradox. The very message that makes them influential can also create unrealistic expectations about their personal emotional experience during hardship. Recent discussions about the Osteen family highlight how private struggles can reshape public perception. Emotional vulnerability from spiritual leaders often produces mixed reactions. Some audiences feel closer to leaders who admit uncertainty or pain. Others may question whether vulnerability conflicts with previously confident messaging. This dynamic reflects a universal psychological pattern. People often want leaders to be both strong and relatable at the same time. However, real life rarely allows both images to exist perfectly together. When religious leaders acknowledge emotional struggle, it can humanize them and strengthen trust with followers who face similar experiences. At the same time, critics may interpret vulnerability as inconsistency. Public ministry exists in a space where emotional authenticity and message consistency constantly interact. The balance is difficult. Too much certainty can feel unrealistic. Too much vulnerability can feel destabilizing to followers who rely on leaders for reassurance. This delicate balance becomes especially visible during family or personal crises, when leaders must choose between privacy and transparency, while knowing both choices will shape public reaction and long-term reputation. The role of Victoria Osteen has historically reinforced the ministry's image of partnership, stability, and shared faith leadership. As co-pastor and public speaker, she has often represented warmth and emotional connection within the ministry's public identity. When public figures known for emotional strength acknowledge personal difficulty, it often resonates deeply with audiences. Vulnerability from secondary leadership figures can sometimes create stronger emotional impact than primary leadership statements. This happens because audiences often perceive secondary figures as more emotionally expressive or relatable. When vulnerability appears in this role, it can shift how audiences interpret the entire leadership structure. Instead of seeing leadership as distant or symbolic, followers may begin to see it as human and emotionally complex. This shift can increase loyalty among supporters who value authenticity. However, it can also trigger renewed scrutiny from critics who may analyze past messaging through a new lens. In media-driven leadership environments, single emotional moments can reshape years of brand perception, especially when those moments involve honesty about uncertainty rather than confident resolution. Public response to emotional openness from faith leaders often spreads rapidly through social media ecosystems. Supportive communities frequently respond with encouragement, prayer messages, and personal testimony sharing. This creates digital empathy waves where followers connect emotionally not only to leaders, but to each other. These responses demonstrate how modern religious communities function socially as well as spiritually. Online support networks can amplify emotional moments far beyond physical congregations. At the same time, digital environments also amplify criticism. Online discourse tends to polarize quickly, with supporters emphasizing humanity and critics analyzing perceived contradictions. This pattern reflects broader social media behavior rather than being unique to religious communities. When spiritual leaders share vulnerability, it often creates a narrative moment where audiences reassess past messaging through current emotional context. For many followers, vulnerability increases credibility. For critics, it may confirm previous doubts. Both reactions can exist simultaneously, showing how complex modern public faith leadership has become in digital communication environments. Large ministries operate under continuous public observation, similar to entertainment or political figures. Every public appearance, statement, or silence can be interpreted as meaningful. This creates constant psychological pressure on leadership families. Unlike traditional private family struggles, public ministry families often experience emotional challenges while knowing millions may speculate or interpret events. This environment can intensify stress and reduce emotional privacy. Leadership families must carefully balance transparency with emotional boundaries. Too much privacy can appear secretive. Too much openness can invite invasive attention. Navigating this balance requires strong internal support systems, including family trust, counseling, and trusted advisors. Religious leadership often adds an additional layer because followers may interpret family experiences as spiritual examples. This symbolic role can make ordinary human experiences feel amplified. Leaders may feel pressure to present personal challenges as lessons, even when situations remain unresolved or emotionally complex. Choosing not to frame pain as inspiration can sometimes feel more authentic, but may also surprise audiences accustomed to motivational storytelling. Public debates about optimism-based theology often resurface during moments of visible leadership struggle. Supporters argue that hope-focused messaging helps people survive difficult seasons emotionally and psychologically. Critics argue that exclusive focus on positive outcomes can leave followers unprepared for long-term suffering or unresolved hardship. This debate reflects centuries-old theological discussions about suffering, faith, and spiritual endurance. Modern media simply makes these discussions more visible. The reality is that many faith traditions contain both hope-based and endurance-based teachings. Leaders often emphasize one depending on personality, communication style, and audience needs. When personal hardship appears, audiences often reassess whether previously emphasized teachings feel complete or balanced. This reassessment is natural and reflects how followers process faith through lived experience. Leadership vulnerability can sometimes broaden public understanding of spiritual messaging by showing that faith can exist alongside confusion, pain, and unanswered questions. Public trust in religious institutions is influenced by leadership behavior during crisis moments. When major public events occur, audiences often evaluate whether leadership responses align with spiritual values. These moments can shape reputation for years. Crisis response expectations include speed, compassion, visibility, and practical action. Even when logistical factors complicate response timing, public perception often focuses on emotional symbolism rather than operational details. This dynamic creates high pressure for visible compassion. For large ministries, crisis response also involves safety planning, legal considerations, and resource coordination. These operational realities rarely match public expectations for immediate emotional action. When gaps appear between expectation and visible response, public debate often follows. These moments rarely define ministries entirely, but often become reference points in public narrative discussions about leadership authenticity and institutional priorities. Financial transparency discussions frequently accompany large ministry growth. As organizations expand globally, financial complexity increases. Staff salaries, broadcast production, building maintenance, and global outreach require structured funding systems. Supporters often view financial growth as evidence of ministry success and global influence. Critics may view it as evidence of institutional commercialization. Both perspectives reflect broader societal conversations about money, influence, and spiritual leadership. Large ministries often operate under nonprofit structures, but public expectations for transparency continue increasing in the digital era. Social media and online financial reporting culture have changed how audiences expect organizations to communicate financial decisions. Leaders must now balance operational privacy with public transparency expectations, especially when ministries operate at global scale. Violence or tragedy affecting religious spaces often creates profound emotional impact on communities. Places of worship represent emotional safety, community connection, and spiritual refuge. When tragedy occurs in these spaces, it can challenge the psychological sense of protection many believers associate with sacred environments. Leadership response during these moments often focuses on unity, healing, and compassion. These responses can influence community recovery and emotional resilience. Public reactions often examine whether leadership messages reflect empathy, stability, and moral clarity. These moments often reshape how communities view vulnerability, faith, and collective support systems during crisis. The emotional cost of public ministry often remains invisible. Weekly speaking, counseling responsibilities, organizational leadership, and media expectations create continuous performance pressure. Unlike many professions, spiritual leadership involves emotional labor tied directly to community well-being. Leaders often absorb community grief, anxiety, and personal stories daily. Over time, this emotional absorption can create compassion fatigue if not balanced with personal emotional support. Many modern ministries now emphasize mental health support for leadership teams, recognizing the psychological intensity of public spiritual roles. Family members of public religious leaders often share indirect leadership roles. Their behavior, public appearances, and emotional tone can influence public perception of the ministry. This dynamic can create pressure for family members to represent stability and spiritual strength, even during personal hardship. When family vulnerability becomes visible, it can shift public perception from symbolic leadership to human leadership. This shift often deepens emotional connection with followers who value authenticity over perfection. Audience expectations of spiritual leaders often reflect deeper cultural needs. In uncertain social periods, people often seek figures who represent emotional certainty and moral stability. When those figures reveal uncertainty, it can initially feel destabilizing, but can also create deeper emotional realism. Many leadership experts argue that long-term trust often grows from perceived authenticity rather than perceived perfection. This shift reflects broader cultural movement toward emotional honesty in leadership across industries. Modern ministry leadership increasingly resembles global communication leadership. Leaders must manage messaging, public perception, crisis response, emotional storytelling, and digital engagement simultaneously. This requires communication teams, media strategy, and reputation management systems similar to global corporations. While spiritual mission remains central, operational structure increasingly reflects modern media organizations. This evolution reflects how technology has reshaped influence and audience engagement across all public-facing professions. Moments of visible vulnerability often become turning points in leadership narrative. They can mark transitions from symbolic leadership toward relational leadership. Supporters often feel stronger emotional loyalty after seeing leaders navigate real hardship. Critics may continue analyzing past messaging, but may also recognize emotional authenticity. These moments often redefine public narrative more powerfully than years of consistent messaging. Faith communities often grow stronger when leaders model endurance rather than perfection. Seeing leaders navigate uncertainty can help followers develop more realistic expectations about spiritual life. Many spiritual traditions emphasize perseverance alongside hope. Public vulnerability can help rebalance spiritual messaging toward long-term emotional resilience rather than short-term emotional relief. Public leadership during personal hardship often requires redefining strength. Strength may shift from confident answers toward emotional steadiness during uncertainty. Audiences increasingly value leaders who acknowledge complexity while maintaining core values. This reflects broader cultural shifts toward emotionally intelligent leadership models. Ultimately, public spiritual leadership exists at the intersection of symbolism and humanity. Audiences often need leaders to represent hope, while also reflecting real human experience. When these two realities meet, it can create powerful storytelling moments that reshape public perception. Rather than weakening leadership, authentic emotional moments can deepen long-term connections